Welcome back, everyone, to our classroom called the College of Glycation. I'm Paul Reynolds, a biomedical scientist and professor of cell biology. And if you've been following along, you've learned how our metabolism shapes everything from energy, our physiology, and the progression of chronic diseases. Today, we're building on those earlier episodes where we talked about glycation, how sugars stick to proteins like caramel on an apple, creating sticky messes called advanced glycation end products. Today, we're building on that foundation. We'll explore how glycation isn't just a player in diabetes, it's sneaking into our allergies, making those seasonal sniffles even worse. We'll tie it all back into insulin resistance because, as you know, that's a key culprit in creating a breeding ground for glycation. And don't worry, we'll end with actionable strategies to fight back. So let's get into it. First off, let's recap quickly the basics of glycation. Think of this process as the previously on segment. Glycation happens when sugars in our blood, like glucose, react in a non-enzymatic fashion, meaning there's no enzyme requirement, and they interact with proteins, lipids, and even DNA. It's a slow burn. No enzymes are needed, and it is spontaneous. All you need is time and excess sugar. The end result is that these advanced glycation end products, or AGEs, accumulate. And these aren't just harmless byproducts, they are, in fact, key troublemakers. In previous episodes, we've talked about how they stiffen tissues, how they turn flexible arteries into rigid pipes, how they impact the progression of your aging, and most recently, how they hinder good bone function. But here's the kicker. AGEs don't just come from your body's high sugar environment, they're also in our diet, especially in highly processed foods that are heated at high temperature. Now, this occurs in a process we've talked about before called the Maillard reaction. That's what gives food its brown, tasty crust. It's basically glycation in action. Now, why does this matter for allergies? Well, allergies, especially seasonal ones, involve your body's overreaction to harmless things like pollen. Your immune system essentially goes into DEFCON 1, triggering inflammation in places like your sinuses and your airways. Glycation can amp this process up. Let's zoom in first on the epithelial cells. Those are the thin layer of cells that line your sinuses, your lungs, and your digestive system, among other places. These are your body's first line of defense. Think of it like the fortress wall for your body. Studies show that AGEs directly attack this wall. For instance, in lung epithelial cells, AGEs bind onto a receptor for AGEs called RAGE, and this process cranks up inflammation via pathways like those controlled by NF-kappa B, a product we've talked about before. This leads to leaky barriers where allergens slip through easier, sparking more immune chaos. Imagine your epithelial cells as a well-sealed roof. AGEs are like acid rain that fall down and corrode the shingles and letting water in, or in this case, pollen, drip in. A study in the Journal of Allergy and Clinical Immunology showed that dietary AGEs disrupt gut and lung barriers, promoting what they refer to as Th2 immunity. Th2 stands for T helper 2 cells, a key part of your immune system. These are like the generals in your body's defensive army, specifically trained to handle allergies and parasites. When allergens like pollen or certain foods sneak in, Th2 cells sound the alarm, triggering a cascade that releases chemicals like histamine and cytokines. This leads to classic allergy symptoms: sneezing, itching, mucus. Basically, your body is trying to flush out the invaders. But here's the catch. When Th2 responses get overactive, especially with glycation and insulin resistance in the mix, they can turn a mild sniffle into a full-blown allergic firestorm. Th2 cells rally the troops: histamine, mucus, sneezing, wheezing, and in the sinuses, AGEs will fuel this chronic inflammation, turning again a simple stuffy nose potentially into sinusitis or inflammation of the sinuses. Research from PubMed links higher age levels to worse asthma problems or exacerbations, especially the neutrophilic kind that's really tough to treat with steroids. Now, this inflammation isn't a one and done deal. It is progressive, as we've covered in the past. AGEs create a feedback loop. They generate oxidative stress. Imagine, again, free radicals bouncing around like pinballs, damaging anything they touch, including cells. And this process will ramp up the release of cytokines, those small signaling molecules that scream inflammation. And the symptoms then snowball. You'll sneeze, you'll wheeze, you'll receive ear pressure from swollen tubes, fatigue from constant immune drain, and even reduced productivity, because who really focuses well with a foggy head like this? Now, triggers like pollen hit harder on this inflamed backdrop. Asthma flares, sinus infections, all are amplified. There was a paper recently published in the journal Nutrients, and the article basically reviews how AGEs from processed foods mimic molecules called alarmins. These are danger signals that trick your body into thinking pollen is in a full invasion. But wait, as we've talked about, how does insulin resistance fit into this whole story? Now we're talking metabolism. You'll remember that insulin resistance is when your cells ignore insulin's knock at the door, because insulin's job is to shuttle glucose into cells, thereby decreasing blood sugar levels to lessen glycation. But when cells resist this signal, blood sugars will stay high, and that's a perfect storm for causing extra glycation. High glucose means more AGEs forming in your body, and this vicious cycle is constantly working against you. Insulin resistance therefore leads to hyperglycemia, which breeds AGEs, which then worsen insulin resistance by gunking up this insulin signaling pathway. For example, AGEs can modify insulin itself, even beyond what we've talked about so far, making even insulin less effective. And that's a problem. So why is this insulin resistance a problem? Well, much beyond diabetes, it fuels chronic low-grade inflammation. It is the cause of a simmering fire that will make your allergies worse. High insulin promotes fat storage, especially visceral fat, which pump out even more inflammatory signals. Uncontrolled blood sugar, again, more glycation, more AGE activation, and therefore more Th2 immune responses. Now, there was a study in the American Journal of Nephrology that linked AGEs to insulin resistance via a link between insulin resistance and the stress that your endoplasmic reticulum receives. The ER stress causes these problems to become much worse. In allergies, this means your already inflamed sinuses and airways get hit even harder, and therefore you will get this fatigue over time and reduced productivity. And that's really a hallmark of insulin resistance as well. Your cells starve for energy while sugar floats around in close proximity, glycating everything they find. So here is a bit of a rhetorical question for you. Have you ever noticed how allergies seem worse when you're stressed or eating junk food? Well, that is no coincidence. Processed foods are age bombs. Imagine French fries, overly grilled meats, and sugary processed snacks. There was a review in the Clinical Chemistry and Laboratory Medicine journal that tied this Maillard reaction, or glycation products, AGEs, to food allergies. And they do it because, as I've mentioned already, they mimic alarmins and disrupt epithelial cells. And there, I promise you, is plenty of evidence. A PubMed study on dietary AGEs and food allergies showed that ultra-processed foods high in AGEs facilitate food allergies by gut barrier disruption. That's messing with the epithelial cells in your digestive system. All of that under the control of a Th2 immune response. In asthma, the researchers also showed that RAGE mediates airway inflammation, and they did show that by way of increased expression of IL-33. That's one of the key inflammatory cytokines that are active in an asthmatic condition. For insulin resistance, glycation induces TNF alpha, modifies insulin, as I've mentioned, and impairs mitochondria. But there is some good news to all of this. There are strategies to protect yourself. And we've talked about some of these in previous episodes. Let's review them in the context of allergies. First, as always, we need to be about taming blood sugar. Low carb eating will keep glucose spikes at a minimum, therefore glucose levels low, and thereby you can slash endogenous AGE formation. That's the formation of AGEs in the body. There's also this concept of exercise. When you exercise, even minimal movement can boost insulin sensitivity. It's kind of like pouring oil on a rusty hinge. It'll work just a bit better if you move it a bit. Now, there are some antioxidants that you could take. These are natural AGE blockers. Imagine in this case, vitamin C, vitamin E, and a host of different herbs like cinnamon. These are great agents because they trap molecules called carbonyls. Those are the intermediates that you find when you are in the process of glycation. Diet-wise, we've talked about this already. Cut the processed food. This is exogenous AGE mitigation. A low-AGE diet is one in which you don't have to only boil and steam and poach, but you do that quite a bit instead of frying or grilling everything that you eat. All of these approaches will drop the circulating AGEs by up to 40%. So you could consider marinating meats in lemon or vinegar, which these acids are known to block the Maillard reaction. Eat more fresh vegetables and fruits because polyphenols in berries and other fruits can quench age-induced inflammation. And for allergies, this means stronger barriers, more capable barriers, and less Th2 immune overdrive. In summary, glycation is the hidden link between sugar, insulin resistance, and allergies. All of these work together to cause problems, and glycation is at the middle of the whole story. Control glycation, and you will control the fire more effectively. By understanding this metabolic twist to allergies, we can empower ourselves to act by, again, keeping blood sugar in check, moving your body even minimally, and eating smart. Control it, and you will control the fire. Remember, as always, stay curious, sharp, and healthy. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'll see you next time.